You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Yeah, good lead in there. So I want to start this out with a little theory that I have over the past year of just pain and anguish that I've gone through in tweaking my microphone settings. And they've just always been bad, no matter what I do, and no matter how good they sound. So today we're recording on my computer, and everything sounds peachy. So not saying it's you, Hayden, but I think there might be something to this.
Well, I mean, I'm on a very different device today. I'm on holiday, so I'm using what I can scrape together. So I'm guessing my audio doesn't sound as peachy as yours, but I think hopefully okay.
You got a box and a shoelace, and you're just wired in. So like Hayden said, we are changing up the intro a bit after 1 year of Arsenal Pass. It's gonna be a little bit more casual, a little bit of a lead-in. So it's gonna be episode 54 of Arsenal Pass. We are going to be doing last week's topic, actually. Fab 2.0 kind of dropped on us, sort of in the middle of the news. But the original intention of last week's episode was to talk about the future of Limited in Flesh and Blood. Considering some information we've gotten, it looks like it's only going to be one more Limited set for the rest of the year. So we're just going to dive into what that set might look like, what we hope to get, and just sort of game design in general. We've seen the evolution of Flesh and Blood, I think. It's been pretty interesting through, I guess we went Arcane Rising to Monarch and then to Tales of Aria, all kind of vastly different sets. But yeah, Hayden, without further ado, we still have our keynote section. So tell me about your week in Flesh and Blood, sir.
Yeah, as I said before, just from the audio I'm on today, I'm on holiday at the moment, so I'm actually sitting at Editor Dave's desk. So Editor Dave, who does our videos, I'm staying at his house. I'm at his desk currently. Didn't provide me the microphone. How rude, right? No, I didn't bring my gigantic mic with me. So played a bit of Flesh and Blood this week. Mostly been catching up with friends and family, and then doing what testing I can. We're in a weird spot before this next announcement in May, where I think we can do a bit of testing and try and work on ideas of what the format may or may not be. But mostly just trying to get to grips with other decks and with things that have been on, I guess maybe my radar is wanting to try and to work on. Now have a bit more time to do that before we get to that May 2nd announcement. So yeah, that's been my Flesh and Blood. I'm going to go and play an Armory tonight. I believe it's Blitz. So someone's organized me a deck, and that's kind of it for this week.
The local New Zealand armories. I heard those are basically callings. Is that true?
I don't know. I'm in Christchurch, so it's very far away from Auckland, where there's some players, who people may make those claims. I'm not so sure. We'll find out, I guess.
Awesome.
I'll tell you what. I'm going to an armory. Dan Mackay will be there. I'm not sure who else will be there, so I'll let you know how I go.
All right, cool. I just wanted to try to verify that claim because I feel like I've heard it for about 2 years now.
I can't help you with that. Sorry.
So yeah, my week in Flesh and Blood. I'm in the same testing situation Hayden is, but I feel like a lot of you listening to this are going to empathize with that weird time, weird announcement we got back on the 2nd. And yeah, what do you do? What do you test? How do you prepare for the upcoming Pro Tour? And how do you prepare to kind of sprint the last 2 weeks? It's quite the conundrum. And I feel like we're doing good work. But nevertheless, it could be Starvo's banned on the announcement, but it could also be Starvo plus 7 other cards are banned because they're trying to shake it up. Nobody knows, but we try to stay on our feet, stay agile, and make sure we're prepared for everything. Well, Hayden, why don't you take me into the news? I feel like I was going to have some kind of cheeky intro there, but then I was just like smelling that Command and Cookout section already before we even got to the news. Getting ahead.
You're gonna have a bit of a surprise after the news, but no, not too much to talk about this week. Obviously, last week really big week for Flesh and Blood with the announcement of Fab 2.0. If you do want to go and find out about more of that information, if you've been living under a rock, I guess, and haven't heard too much about Fab 2.0 already, the announcement is up on fabtcg.com. Really, some awesome quality of life changes and some things that are going to be happening basically, almost immediately with how things are working, even from the fact that I believe the battle hardens that happened this weekend were rated events. So, already big changes happening with Fab 2.0. Do want to give a massive shout out to Yuan Ji Lee, who did win the Cookout calling, playing Viserai. Brendan, I believe you know Yuan Ji Lee and have had interaction. Is he Dallas local, or he's local to
New
the East Coast,
Jersey?
is that right?
So
yeah,
the story behind this is that Michael Fang came down for the Battle Harden here in Dallas. His flight got canceled, so he stayed with me until the following day's evening. So as a result, we got to play a lot of games, and I got to get to know Michael really well, which was nice. But we played a lot of Viserai mirrors, so worked a little bit on the deck, I guess, and there was sort of a wild card that I'd been running in my deck for the Battle Harden, half because I thought it was good, half because I thought it was a meme, and that's Tome of the Arknight. And Yanji actually gave me a shout out on his winning interview about that card. Apparently, it did him pretty well at that tournament. Like, he just totally rolled some people with it, which is basically what Tome of the Arknight does. It goes, okay, play this card and generate a rune chant, or play this card and win the game on the spot, because it's ridiculous. So big congratulations to him. I really like the narrative, actually, behind this whole thing, which is, he went with Michael Fang. They're really close friends. And so what I said was, 1 calling champion went over, 2 came back.
Yeah, I mean, shows just how strong a player Yuan Ji is to go over there to this first calling. Some really strong players in that top 8. I think multiple national champions in that top 8 from Europe. Very good first calling. I didn't, unfortunately, just time zone and the weekend I had was very busy. Didn't get to catch any of the coverage of the calling. But from what I understand, obviously a lot of rounds rather than a long event, because it's blitz, so 2 days. So some really interesting games, and yeah, I mean, I guess the overall narrative was the dominance of Viserai. I think it was 5 Viserais in the top 8, which, to be honest, I wouldn't have been surprised to see 6 or 7. So yeah, just massive shout outs to all those players that went over from around Europe and abroad. Obviously, we saw multiple players from the US go, but I believe Germany had a pretty good time. I think a couple of German players in the top 8, as well as maybe 1 or 2 Dutch players as well. So yeah, great event all around by the sounds of it. The venue looked awesome, by the way. I hope we get calling venues like that.
Yeah, it definitely did. I was really surprised at the lack of Kasai's in top 8. What happened, dude? I thought it was the best deck in Blitz.
I definitely wasn't.
I've been just dunking on Kasai, I think, for a few weeks now. But hopefully these results at least back up some of the things I've been saying. I did throw up a Viserai deck tech on the Arsenal Pass YouTube channel. This is in lieu of my semifinals loss at the Battle Harden recently here in Dallas. Just talked a little bit about my deck, Viserai in general, mostly pointing to the point of like how you win the game with that deck, because I think that's the hardest part about playing Viserai is first you got to learn the lines, right? The lines can be a bit complicated with Become the Arknight and Rattlebones. Decision trees can get a bit dense, but then after that you just really need to understand your role, and I think once that finally clicks, you'll be clapping a lot of cheeks on turn 2, to say the least. Did also throw up a additional write-up to that on the Arsenal Pass Patreon, where I go into more depth on the matches, as well as like the armor and some card choices. So yeah, check that out on the Patreon if you're interested. And finally, just a big thank you to all the Arsenal Pass patrons. You guys do help us out so much, and the support is incredible, so we really can't thank you enough. But Hayden, is that the barbecue, or is that something else? What am I smelling?
Yeah, look, I've wanted to add a new section for a while, which is we get a lot of comments on our YouTube sort of videos, the weekly pods. Since we started doing video, I think apart from this episode, Brendan, no video this week, as you noticed, just a couple of nice pictures of myself and Brendan. But usually we do have the video, and we started that I think back in January, basically the start of the new year. And since then, I think our YouTube videos in general had a lot more, I guess, interaction, just because there's something to look at, I guess. And there often be some really good things bubble up after the episodes, because we do have a lot of discussion points. Obviously, we have the news, we have our Command Cookout section, and then our main topics usually generate quite a lot of interesting discussion. Some of that filters onto Twitter, some of that's on YouTube, some of that we just have in discussions with each other or with others post the episode. But what I did want to look at, Brendan, is kind of in the comment section. I don't really have a nice name for it or a cute name for it, but just on the back of last week's Fab 2.0 announcement, really interesting. I thought we'd just look back and just reflect on some of the things that have happened since then, and just the general sort of, I guess, sentiments of the community. So overall, I think the community feel for Fab 2.0, because obviously we recorded that immediately. We didn't get a chance to, I guess, take in how other people felt. We just recorded our raw feelings. We literally read the announcement and then we hit record and we did it. So overall, the community feels, I think, pretty similar to us. Great announcement, really positive steps to the game, which is really cool to see. I think we thought that would probably happen. We felt that this was a really positive announcement. We thought that people would feel very similar about it. And it turns out, for the most part, people do feel really positive about this. Also, we did a bit of a section, current state of the game. I think that's some similar feelings around where the game is right now. And then this historic sort of sets that are coming out with, obviously foreign language, with non-English language sets, and the whiteboarded element of that. The support for that seems to be huge. There's some questions around why they've decided to do 36 pack booster displays rather than the traditional 24. But from overall, this seems to be going down really well across people who maybe want a non-English language set, but also those who want access to these cards for an ongoing period of time. So although, I can't say I'm a big fan of these whiteboarded cards, I thought they were a little bit of an eyesore when I saw them. It looks like they're going to go down pretty well, which is great to see, and give more people access to these cards potentially.
Yeah, and people hopefully get to a point where people complaining about acquiring some of these cards becomes less of an issue. I do say the word complain because I do feel not because everybody should be spending money on cards, but because I hear this argument a lot around staples and their role in your deck to perform at even the lowest level, and I think that's just absolutely not true. I think that you can get really far in Flesh and Blood without a lot of these sort of legendaries, and Chase Majestic specifically, like these E-Strike and Command and Conquers. But yeah, this definitely helps. I'm all for it. I'm so not attached to me having things that other people can't have. The most tragic thing is for me is whenever I go to an armory and then someone says, brings a deck and they're like, oh, I just can't really have this, and they're not enjoying their experience because of that. I'm like, dude, just proxy it. Just pretend like that's a tunic. I don't care. Just do whatever, right? So more access, the better. I'm all for it.
Yeah, well, though, if you're going to head to an armory at the moment and you're playing Viscera and Blitz, you probably, some of your default equipment might be to not even play a legendary at the moment. You could very well be playing Suckless Suede Hides, Skelada, Cool Hand, and Hope Merchant's Hood. So
absolutely,
might leave you a little bit vulnerable, but it could be right in the correct. Could be correct in this meta.
For sure. When you're there to kill on turn 2, the Hope Merchant's Hood comes in handy, baby.
So I've heard. Other I guess reflections from last week's episode. Brendan, you cannot have 2 GMIDs. That is not allowed.
Even if I don a mustache. And so this is an interesting argument we just got to touch on. I think the immediate shutdown of that idea is less intelligent than it seems, where it's you immediately think of course you can't, right? But it is weird to breed to create a structure that disincentivizes a very small group of players, I will say, mind you, from playing sometimes. So while I don't think that the system would actually work, there's so many issues that come on the back end, if one player has to stake elo and the other doesn't, it's not really fair. And then win trading, God, who even knows? But I do think that this system fundamentally has increased the logistical workload for legendary studios to maintain the integrity of their elo system by tenfold. And I just hope that they actually kept that in mind when they made this change, right? Because if you look at the happy pathways, it makes a lot of sense. People have more chances at elo, there's more on the line, just more participation overall, because there have been some regions of the world that are drastically underserved. But then if we take it back to the original ideology of what elo is, this is a huge departure, actually, because before these were events that were very curated. They had sort of kind of a foundation that you needed to meet, a base amount of requirements, and those were definitely not equivalent to a small armory, local judges, and maybe a few people, maybe capping quite low, pre-selling these things. And I'm not saying that's going to happen every time, but these are cases that now Legendary Studio, I feel is responsible for sort of maintaining, because the integrity of the entire system is at jeopardy with this. So I think there's good things, of course, but again, one of my core issues with Legend Story is sometimes when they make these announcements, I feel like I didn't really get the full story, right? They just kind of give me the base. And I'm like, well, did you think about everything else that could have happened? It's like, if they tell me they do, then I'm like, for sure, you're the boss. Like, I'm in 100%. I trust you all the way. But with this stuff, like goes back to like the gifting PTIs, the XP. It's like there's another side of this that like there are intangible effects and tangible effects that happen that are not beneficial. It's like you just have to be prepared as the company or the studio to sort of oversee that and maintain that, because there's a lot at stake here. And I just want to say, I know that's kind of a rant, but I think it's important because there is a good conversation to have about this change, and it is a massive change.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's definitely a conversation to have about it. But you still can't have two GMIDs, Brendan.
Well, you haven't seen my wigs. They're pretty good.
No, I think there is an interesting conversation on the back of that, but it's always the same. It's like if they hadn't changed the system and you isolate regions, there's so many things that come with not making that change as well. So it's double-sided, right? There's always two sides to everything, and there's always things you have to balance on both sides. So there's never, with these kind of decisions, it's never perfect. But I have faith that at least some of this will be accounted for, and hopefully they're mitigating a lot of larger factors. I mean, in other, you can look at other games as a bit of an indicator. In other games, elo goes down to the lowest levels, and they would generally have K factors, but actually often not as many K factors as what LSS are looking at for Fab moving forward, which I do like. I like there is quite significant changes in the K factors, and that you talked about being disincentivized to play, and yes, I can see that to a degree, but it's coming as like small amounts of elo, and because it's all relative just at exponential levels of K value, it seems like the service level is a system that's going to work really well. But there's definitely a couple of things on the back end of it, like you say, logistical side and how
integrity,
run and
things like that.
Yeah, of course, but that's always the same. It's been the same for every system used so far, and it's going to be the same for any qualification system you use, to be honest.
But definitely have to hard disagree, because I think that the system before for ELO was very structured. And LSS
XP is not. I'm talking about XP.
Oh yeah, I mean yeah. That's what I'm saying. Is like XP was kind of a disaster, right? When we saw the 1K to XP, pretty much everybody exploited that system to get those gold foils.
This is much better than that.
Yeah, definitely. My whole argument, right, is that there is more to be talked about when you make a change like this. Like it's not simple. It's not just like we add these things in. Like this is a massive change to Flesh and Blood, organized play, competitive, and that's that elo system, like what it means and what players will do to kind of acquire it. So like I just felt like it wasn't being talked about, and I think it's an important topic, because I think we're going to be sort of reaping whatever they've sown with this new change for years to come.
What do you mean by players doing whatever they can to acquire it? Because what players can do to acquire it is play events, which is surely the best thing for the game.
Sure. So, like, you would like me to go into depth about like what people did to acquire ELO at a faster rate than that was physically possible for other people?
For ELO? Yeah, sure.
No, for XP, yeah. But XP was...
No, exactly what people did for XP. XP is very different, though, because there's a lot of different exploits for that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because, like, you're right, because a skirmish is much different than a road to nationals, when it actually isn't, right? No, not really.
Well,
you can still have a road to nationals in sort of a lesser populated area. Or even in a populated area, you can cap it for whatever reason, store size, COVID restrictions, and then you can pre-sell it to the people that you want to. It's happened many times, and like I know it's more of an America thing where it's happened, but we've talked about it so many times, and it happens, and it's not good. It was bad when it was happening for XP and skirmish prizes. Now it's rated ELO. So
how does that help people exploit the ELO system?
How does it help people exploit the ELO system?
Yeah, because unlike XP, when you use ELO, you are taking and giving, not just giving.
Yeah, so basically not everybody has a fair... not everybody would have a fair way to compete in that sense, right? Like you can't travel to the events that you might want to travel to. You can't compete when you want to. And there may be situations where you could stop outside players from coming in and playing in your local meta and effectively coming in and leeching your ELO, right? Rather than transferring it between yourselves.
I honestly think that's going to be so niche and that's so small. We saw that starting to be stamped out in the skirmish seasons and all the events so far. I can't see that being as big an issue as it is with, say using an XP system where it's all.
But I
it's
agree
all
with you though,
additive.
right? Like if we just list like what I said verbatim was like I don't think it's going to be a huge massive issue that's going to happen, but I don't think that it 100% won't happen. And now it's on Legend Story to sort of maintain the integrity of that system with these less regulated events. Like it's a big change, right? That's what I'm saying. Is like it's not as simple as it looks.
All right. I think that is an issue, but I think that is an issue is very, very minor. And to be honest, if Legend Story Studios haven't had more than a 5-minute conversation about it, I think they're probably going to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, in lieu of some recent decisions, I would question, but yeah, I mean, like, I have to sort of bring it back, right, and just kind of end with, I'm not saying it's a bad system. I'm not even saying I'm not in favor of the system, but what I am saying is that, like, I wish we would have gotten more information. I wish it would have been more of like here's why we're doing it, here's what we're thinking, here's how it's going to be executed, rather than just like, oh, we made this change because it's just nice. It's like, it might just be me losing some faith, but I would have liked them to expand a bit on it, you know?
Yeah, okay. Fair enough. Yeah, to be honest, I feel like most of the service level changes seem really good, and it gives opportunity. I feel like the execution with the K-level factor is really nice. Like they've really thought about that. But yeah, I think there's going to be some small teething issues and things that come up. I don't disagree. So it'd be interesting to see what those are. Obviously, you've just highlighted one that you think could be and very well might be an issue. But I'm sure we'll see. There'll probably be others as well. So especially around just total events, especially at higher level K factors. I think callings not being accessible to a lot of areas is still going to be a massive factor because of the K value of those. But we will see. The game's still expanding.
That's unfortunate. Yeah, I mean that's unfortunately been a bit of a like COVID and restriction things. I know the logistics on that have been tough, which is but like on the bright side of all this, like Fab 2.0 is a massive hit. Like there's a lot of positive feedback. People are very happy. Like I think that this is, and we said it last week, right? It is a step in like the absolute right direction. And I'm super excited. I just don't want us to detract from the overall positivity of this announcement and of this change by kind of harking on some like theoretical negative, right? So yeah, I just kind of want to end with that.
Fair enough. All right, last one from our reflection on Fab 2.0 post sort of hearing the feedback around suspended list. There's been obviously a big change as well as the getting rid of ban and restricted, and we're now banned and suspended, and what that means for the game going forward. And I guess the biggest question that's come out of that for the immediate is, will we see the suspended list used with the May announcement? And is that why potentially the ban and now suspended announcement was moved, or I guess not moved, but Alice defaulted on doing anything in this April announcement to a May announcement now with a suspended list?
For sure. Yeah, it could be. I would definitely be willing to die on the hill that they just weren't prepared to make the decision at that point. But yeah, I mean, I am interested in the suspended list specifically for Blitz. I think that Blitz does need a few changes that can make it a lot more interesting. We talked about the power of Viscera in the beginning of this pod, but you could probably hit a few things to sort of freshen up the meta and make it a bit more interactive. It could be destined to be a two-turn format. That's not inherently bad. I just think that more decks being viable outside of these crazy combo decks like Viscera or just like Oldhim who can kind of do everything super well, or Kana, right, which is just like a kind of a derivative of Viscera at this point, would be really nice.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, throw a bit of oil across there, across that grill, because the Command and Cookout is basically that question. So if you do want to get your Command and Cookout question, and you can get it through to arsenalpassfab@gmail.com, you can drop it in the YouTube comments below and let us know that it's a Command and Cookout question, or you can send it through to us on Twitter. But Brendan Fancy on the community Discord asks, is competitive Blitz the future of Blitz? If so, then how does the format as it stands today, very fast, commons kill by turn 3, as you just said, change to benefit it being a viable competitive format? Is best of 3 an option? Could suspensions slow down the format, or something else?
Best of 3. I really doubt they ever go back to best of 3. So Flesh and Blood actually went through a phase of doing best of threes. I don't know if were your top eights best of three, Hayden, or had they gotten rid of it?
Just the final.
Just the final. Okay, which was really weird in limited, particularly. But best of three, I doubt it. I actually saw this question, and there was a pretty funny response someone made, which says that is competitive Blitz the future of Blitz? And they just said like, Blitz is competitive and is the main format, and Class Constructed is just big deck Blitz. It's like, it's kind of felt like that recently.
Interesting.
But Hayden, do you think that like via a few card changes that we could actually slow down the format? Because like, think about it. If we think about what we're gonna ban, right? It might be something with Oldhim, I guess, but it's like definitely something with Viscerai, and then who knows if we hit Kano. But then like there's like these sort of decks in the sitting in the grass, right? Like Rhinar that kind of still kills on turn 2, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I feel there's a lot of viable decks in this format. The problem is that there's one deck that does this turn 2 sort of thing a lot more consistently with slightly more power than other decks in the format, right? So if you do want it to be a format that's like a turn 3 format, I think that's maybe okay. But at the moment, there's multiple decks that can do it by turn 3, but there's a deck that does it by turn 2 fairly consistently, right? So that's kind of the issue that you're facing if you're trying to balance this format. In terms of like, do you want it to be something else entirely? I don't think so, because I think that requires a big change to, like, James White said it. He said it in his interview. Actually, I was listening to the Covenant cast with Zach and Steven, and they asked about, I guess kind of Blitz heroes and the support for them. And James says, it's a format that gets a lot less attention because just the nature of their time spent in Class Constructed is their main format. So when they release heroes like Valdur or Data Doll or who it is, these other auxiliary Blitz heroes, the time spent on those is not as much. But the format overall is a lot faster because the power level is just shrunk down, right? It's not actually, it's not changed or anything. A lot of the interactions are still the same. It's just, on a shorter time frame. So I think to change that is going to be massive. You'd have to do these huge changes, use the suspended list very aggressively, use the ban list very aggressively, and I don't think that makes a lot of sense. So I think instead, if you're okay for this to be a 3-turn format and to be about positioning and making the right decisions across 3 turns, the best 3 turns of decisions you can. And sometimes you won't always get to make 3 turns worth of decisions. Maybe it'll be 1 turn, the decision doesn't matter, 2 turns, they really matter. And in some games, maybe 20% of games go longer than that, 5, 6, 7, 8 turn games. Then that's fine, especially if there's a deck that comes in that can really control that sort of pace. Then I think that's fine, but you just have to understand what we need to do to make sure that happens. And I think doing something to Viscerai is probably the way to do that.
Do you think that they could have a derivative format of Blitz? Like, I think this is what Fancy's saying, called competitive Blitz, where they just kind of aggressively suspend cards?
I just don't think it works. I don't know. Yeah, maybe, but I just, like I say, I think that requires just so much focus on it, and also probably a really aggressive amount of suspending and banning. I think what we see in the future is we're going to see another format in the form of Commoner come out, which is, it's not competitive, but maybe Blitz is the competitive. Well, why is it not competitive? We've just seen it be competitive. I
agree with you that it's had callings, but I feel like I can't quote it off the top of my head, but I feel like that Legendary Studios has made the statement that Blitz is a casual format. I could be wrong.
I don't think they have. I think they've said it's a great gateway format to Classic Constructed, and they've said that it's a great format for things like Skirmish. I think they might have said that it is good for casual players. I don't think they've actually explicitly said it's a casual format, and I don't think it is. They've just hosted a call-in. They've just put a Battle Hardens on for the Blitz, so I don't think it is. It's just about what they actually want to do with it. I think they're clearly dipping their toes at the moment to see what the format can and cannot be, and then they've got to make some decisions. I'm fine for it to be a competitive format. I just think they have to use it sparingly. It's clearly not as robust. It's clear you have to use the time you're spending on your formats, I think, should reflect the highest level of formats. If the order is Classic Constructed, then Limited, and then Blitz, then your formats should reflect that. Your competitive level formats should reflect that. Where CC is the most amount, your Pro Tours, your callings, a majority of those, then Limited, and then maybe sprinkle in some Blitz callings and Battle Hardens, etc. Maybe a Pro Quest season. I think that's fine.
I think there's a little bit of context that should be added there, which is like these Blitz callings and Battle Hardens happened after Everfest, which was a set that devoted a lot of game design to Blitz. And then the last time we had a Blitz calling was after the announcement of Blitz and during Crucible, so kind of the creation of the format. I wonder if we're at like peak. Let's say we have a limited set, right, for a few months. If they kind of sprinkle in a Blitz calling at that time, that would be interesting, and I think that would sort of cement in my mind that this is going to be a part of the competitive Rolodex of events. But I do want to say one little anecdote, because I definitely talk a lot of crap about Blitz nowadays. I didn't used to. I talked to Michael Fang after the tournament. I think he lost his winning, and so he played well, did the whole tournament. His friend won the tournament, and I was like, hey, so playing a Blitz calling, did you enjoy yourself? Did you have fun? Did you feel like it was worth your while? And he said, yeah, like there is, you can't just lose sometimes, but ultimately, if you play tight and you sort of have a game plan of how you want to win, like there's a lot of edge that you can get, and he feels like he wasn't let down by it, which is a good thing. It's a good thing to hear that takeaway, right? Like someone goes to a Blitz calling, they play, and they enjoy it, right? Like, and they do feel some sort of, like they played a competitive event, right? It wasn't just sitting down to roll dice against their opponent. So I was really happy to hear that. And that was how I felt when I played the Battle Hardened as well. But I just wanted to give a little anecdote because I did have time to speak to him after the event.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I mean, all you have to do is look at the results. All you have to do is look at that top 8. The players that I looked down that top 8, there was, Yuanji, like you said, Michael narrowly missed top 8. There was, I think, 2 national champions in that top 8. It is, as much as you can say, there is. Just because it's shorter and more explosive doesn't mean there's, I guess, there's less skill involved. Because people say, oh, there's less decisions. Yeah, there is, but you still have to get the decisions that you make correct. And some of those decisions are actually more complicated, and you actually can't get away with making bad decisions. So I think there's still a lot of skill involved in that format. I wouldn't get into the argument of is there less, is there more? I don't know. I think it's really dependent on each of the formats individually, and how you contextualize and how you want to sort of qualify skill in that way. But I think clearly you've seen very good players do well this weekend.
Yeah. Details don't really matter. Like, at the end of the day, it's like, don't write it off. It's still flesh and blood. It's still fun. And you can have a great time at these callings, because I know some people were like, oh, I'd never go to a Blitz calling. I would go to a Blitz calling. I mean, I went to Tales of Arya Seals callings. Come on. I know variants.
Yeah, I mean, I would go to a Blitz calling if it's close, right? Like, I wouldn't travel to Poland, I don't think, but I'd play one locally. So I just want to go back to Fancy's question: Is a competitive Blitz the future of Blitz? I mean, I think so. I think Commoner is your very casual format that you're not going to see. Probably, maybe you might see a skirmish at some point, but I doubt it, because that is kind of doesn't really fit with what Flesh and Blood is, right? Like, in terms of from a set design and from that sort of thing, it's not thought about as a format. So I can't see that happening. So I think competitive Blitz is the future of Blitz. Yes. Do I think best of 3? No. Actually, funny little story just quickly. The best of 3. So me and Matt Rogers played our calling final best of 3. We played game 1, and me and Matt kind of goes, I'm pretty sure I can't win this. And I go, yeah, I don't think you can. I've just seen your whole deck, and you've just seen my whole deck. I know exactly every card that's in your deck, and you know exactly what's in mine. And we're going to play this out. And then we said to James afterwards, we're like, yeah, just best of 3 and limited, especially once you've just seen your opponent's entire deck, it's kind of irrelevant, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But maybe it's slightly different in Blitz, where it's a 2-3 turn format, but I don't see it happening. It's just not the way the game's designed. Suspensions to slow down the format, yeah, I think it could be. I think maybe instead of a 2 and 3 format, it's a turn 3 to 5 format, and I think suspensions could help that in terms of slowing it down even more. I think that requires a lot of change, and I don't see it.
Yeah, I don't think that Legend Story Studios has the bandwidth on the game design team to aggressively suspend and try to make Blitz a healthy format. I think they have sort of bigger fish to fry with.
Maybe in the future.
Yeah, maybe in the future. But yeah, so we'll see. I do expect some bands to come, though, in the next announcement. But yeah. Anyway, Hayden, let's go ahead and head into the main topic. Talk about Limited. We've been talking about Blitz for so long. So a little bit different than last week's Fab 2.0. We really just dug into that announcement. And we're going to be speculating on the future. And the future of, dare I say, Hayden Dale's favorite format, but maybe my favorite format as well, which is Limited Flesh and Blood. So Hayden, take us in.
Yeah, Limited is super important. James and Legend Story Studios have said that repeatedly, that they wanted to make a game that was also designed for limited, not just constructed play. That was very much in the forethought of what Flesh and Blood is. And I think you really saw that. I mean, Welcome to Wraith will go down as, I think, just one of the best limited formats for sealed, for draft. I think clearly when they looked at that set and they wanted to release it, they had put a lot of time and effort into the limited format. Plus, they'd thought about obviously constructed and what that might look like for the future, but it was a base set, was the first set. And we had a lot of limited events post-release. Of course, that meant that not a lot of people played it because it was so small at the time. But Welcome to Wraith the Feywild, people got to play the draft format and see just how good that format is. Arcane Rising, I think, was universally a bit of a miss for people, but again, very small player base. The sealed format was kind of derided. People didn't think it was very good, but the draft format was seen as maybe okay. And then you head into Monarch, right? Which is kind of the first time that a bigger base of players get a hold of it from a limited standpoint. Although we still don't have that many events. I think at the end there was maybe 1 or 2 callings and some other events, but pretty small again. But people start to get to see this limited format, and of course the talent system comes in and does what it does. And then we get to Tales of Aria, which is the first time that a lot of people get to get their hands on it. Yes, we see some problems with the sealed format. We see Brada eventually errated. Brada.
You say burrata? It's a type of bread.
It's cheese, mate. But also, it's an errata Briar. But then you see that, right? And then you get this draft format that I think most people think is a pretty good draft format. Some people think it's a very good draft format, me included. So limited through Flesh and Blood has really gone on a journey. And I think the question that I'm really asking myself, and I would love to ask yourself, Brendan, but also LSS and James White, is what is next for limited and where do we go from here, especially post the Fab 2.0 announcement? They've continually said that limited is going to be important, but when I listened the other day to James White talk, as I said on this Covenant cast, he did make it pretty clear that Classic Constructed is the number one format that they think about for balancing. Albeit, interestingly, when Seeds of Agony got banned, they pointed out that Seeds was banned, debate balance for limited, which then ended up hitting in a constructed. But I think they're spending more of their focus on the constructed element. So what does that actually mean for the future of limited? Well, we're about to get one more limited set, a limited playable set this year. It's going to be the only limited playable set this year. That's basically we're going to spend, I think it's going to end up being about 16 months between the first and third set that we're going to have in terms of, so between Tales and the set after Uprising. So we're going to have one set in 17 months effectively that's fresh. That's really interesting, I think, from a game that talks about being limited focus and having this limited element to it and being about good limited play. Because then the other set that we're going to have this year is supplemental. So I guess, Brennan, initially, if we talk about it, like, what are your thoughts on limited as a format? Like, do you think it's a good format? Do you think it's something that Flesh and Blood should continue to go after and pursue as not only just a format for the game in general, but a competitive format?
Yeah, I love limited. Keeps me interested in the game. Like, I feel like limited keeps my attention much longer than Classic Constructed does over sort of a long period of time where there's no changes. Like, I'm always happy to just like do a draft with friends, right? Because it's very like it's different every time. It depends who you play with. But it's like it was a huge focus of this game from the very beginning. I heard that from James himself back when I met him in Austin in 2019, and then like you can just see it through design, right? Like this game is designed to be drafted, it's designed to be played in a sealed format, and I've been really happy with it so far, and actually think it's improved kind of set to set. Like, Monarch was probably my favorite limited format, outside of Welcome to Wraith, but the Welcome to Wraith I kind of just chalk up to nostalgia sometimes, and I don't count it. But yeah, I mean, we went to a format with 3 heroes in Tales of Aria, so what does the 4th one look like? Like, the design it seems to kind of be ever evolving, especially in regards to limited, but yeah, I would be interested to hear your thoughts in terms of like the durations, right? Like, so how long we go between sets. It does feel long, Hayden. It does feel long. I don't think there's much we can do to change that, but I would like more sets that are draftable, more limited sets. Honestly, I would like more sets kind of overall instead of going into some of these lull periods like we did back like a little bit pre-December and throughout December. But alas, that's how it is. How are you feeling about the 17-month kind of technically one fresh set? I guess you could sort of backdate it to the set before that is fresh at the beginning of that time period. But
sure.
What is like? Yeah, just give me Hayden Dale's palette on that.
Well, it's probably going to end up being about 9 months between each. I think that's a really big period of time
Oof.
to have.
Yeah, you could have a new person could be created in that time. That's a long time.
I think more sets is I'd be really wary of more sets. I think the release schedule idea of what was, I guess, touted originally, and I know that was always subject to change, but 2 standalone sets and then 1 expansion set, which is now they're going to call it supplemental expansion, I believe, with Fab 2.0. So that makes sense to me. That gives you about roughly like 4 to 6 months between those standalone sets, those draftable, limited playable booster sets. Obviously that slightly changes depending on release schedule and where the expansion set falls. And then if they're going to do potentially 2 expansion sets, unsure about how that works. But that would kind of, I think 2 sets to me, I think they can do that in a really good way where it keeps limited fresh. And then also you have this ability to have a limited set come out. You can either have the constructor calling immediately, the constructor pro tour immediately, and then you could go into a limited season. I think that would be really cool, right? So maybe you say, okay, Uprising releases, we go into Pro Tour number 2. There's actually a bit of a gap, which I don't love, but is what it is. Uprising releases, we get the second Pro Tour. This is all hypothetical. And then you have immediately post that, maybe it's a Pro Quest season that's constructed. And then, you have a couple of weeks break for maybe a Blitz skirmish season or whatever, and you go into this limited format. And then that takes you through to Set X or whatever. Like, I think there's ways to do it where you get to have a really healthy amount of limited, really healthy amount of constructed, a really healthy amount of like Blitz sprinkled in there. And then you get to your next set, where there'd be another standalone set, and then maybe limited becomes the focus that time. Okay, it's a limited Pro Tour, so the first 6 weeks are really focused on limited. We have a couple of callings, the Pro Tour, and then you move into constructed or whatever it is. I think that works well. That would be my ideal, and I don't think you need more sets to do that. It's about release schedule and having just these standalone draftable sets, which I think is super important. And I really miss these. I'm missing limited right now. It's the one thing I want to be playing. I almost sorted out a draft last night instead of doing some other things with friends because I really want to play limited, but it's not fresh. I played a lot of Tails, and I don't really want to be continuing to draft Tails. So that is the one thing I feel like I'm missing with this game. It's like really good limited play, and for it to be fresh every now and again. And waiting, 9 months and really hammering a format for, say, a nationals, and then not having anything to look forward to for limited for what was my nationals January, but it would have been November. That's 8 months, 7 months. That's a long time. So I think there's definitely. I'm worried about this kind of new release schedule and the fact that it seems like we're not going to have as much limited as I would like.
Yeah, I do. Gosh, I always throw on the tinfoil hat. I must be so annoying to some people. I do have a little theory that, most of Flesh and Blood was actually developed before the game was released. And I think we're getting close to exhausting the sets that were designed fully during that period. And now we're getting into the time where we have new sets coming out. Sets that have didn't even reach ideation until, Welcome to Wraith was in the hands of players. And I think that is just such a different beast, right? There's like one thing when you have 6 years to develop your first few sets, you got all the time in the world, you're testing, you've sorted out all the logistics, whatever it is. But now you've got to develop and run the company on the fly, create all this OP, balance current sets. So I wonder if it's sort of we're seeing a repercussion of that, and if it's going to get better or if it's going to get worse. But I ultimately hope that we do pivot to more sets, but that could be strictly ignorance, right? Like I could just not understand how the entirety of that process of what I'm actually asking for, what the downsides are of that. But it does feel like with this release schedule that we might go through some periods of kind of stale, right? Or dull. We've sort of overplayed some of the sets, overplayed the formats. And I'm not a big fan of those formats being artificially shaken up by sort of bans that aren't needed. Like that's not cool, right? Like it's like, oh, we just banned Storvo. It's like, yeah. I mean, if you want things to be feel organically new and inventive, yeah, just drop it during a set. Or I wonder, yeah, I mean, or there's of course like the things that like Hearthstone does, probably not executable on a paper TCG where they do like mini sets. Just inject a few kind of key cards into the game every now and then. That's a very digital card game thing, but yeah, I think we're getting slightly off topic. Go ahead.
I was just say like that's I guess the idea of what these expansion sets are, right? These formerly supplemental sets are, and that's fine. That's great. I think the one thing I think LSS can do a better job of is the scheduling of OP. around those. And to be fair, it's been thrown into absolute turmoil and chaos by what COVID has done. And I expect that they'll get a lot better at this going forward. But aside from that, because I think it's very different, that's starting to talk about constructed and all those things. And if I just bring it back to limited and just what is your overall thought? Just this is a bit of speculation because we are going to dive into, I guess, the future of limited and the things that we want to see and the learnings and things like that. But just from a purely release schedule and the future of limited as a macro kind of thing, do you see this kind of idea of expansion, one, maybe two standalone sets a year, which would mean that we're sort of looking at 7 to 10 month stretches of one limited format? Do you see that being the future? And if you do you think that that means that limited really drops down in sort of the pecking order of this game moving forward?
That's an interesting question. Because like I said, I have had personal conversations with James where he expressed his sort of passion for limited and how important it was in Flesh and Blood. So I'd be surprised if it sort of started to fall towards the wayside. But with that release schedule, I mean, it's not a lot of sets, right? I remember when Crucible of War first came out, I was actually so disappointed that was even a thing. We've talked a million times on the pod about how much Hayden and I love Crucible of War, and we're absolutely blown away by the product. But I remember when I went from Welcome to Wraith to Arcane Rising, and I was like, the next set won't be draftable. I was like, this is garbage. Because like that's what I love to do. I love drafting. I love playing limited. Constructed as well, but constructed gets, I think, much older, much faster. So I hope it doesn't become that, Hayden. I really hope it doesn't. If it does, we're gonna have to start cubing.
Yeah, well, we could. Maybe we'll do a pod on cubing. I think my kind of, just before we move on, my overall kind of takeaway is I don't think it will. I think this is this year's release schedule. But the one thing I hope that LSS do, and I feel like would really be a signal of intent, is that once Uprising releases, I believe that's the next standalone set, right? Yeah, Uprising. That we get a limited season. We get a ProQuest season of limited. I think that's really what we need. I think that would really take it into the hands of more players, because at the moment I think they've done a good job of what they've done with the first season and heading into the second season of ProQuest in terms of encouraging players to play. I would love to see maybe ProQuest season into maybe even a skirmish season where we use limited. I would at the very least ProQuest, because I think we had it as a skirmish season and a national season, but I think to put it into the hands of a ProQuest season, that's showing intent of what they want to do with their limited format. And maybe Tails they didn't feel wasn't right. I know they thought it was a great draft format. Obviously, we had draft skirmishes, you had draft at nationals, but sealed at the callings, and maybe feedback as well. They didn't feel that the seal was good enough, but hopefully moving forward that issue is resolved or solved or whatever. And we can have a great limited season which shows some intent. And then we get into 2023 and we'll see what happens then with possibly two standalone sets.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see. All right, Brendan. So that's kind of, I guess, where we see the future of limited. I guess the answer is we don't know. We'd both like to see it used more and to have sets that allow for fresher limited play more regularly, especially as you head into, key events, right? Like you want to see a limited format. It's less interesting, I think, to see a limited format explored than it is a classic constructor format, right? Because it's, there's less involvement in terms of it's about the cards you get on the day. It's not about what you bring in the innovation, but it is still really important. But maybe the viewership piece as well, I just want to say that is maybe it's a little bit less enticing.
Definitely less enticing, to be fair. Like, I like it. I
draft and
yeah, for sure. So they have instituted things that helped with that. So like following someone's draft, and that was a huge change. I remember I was basically yelling at Tannen that they got to do this. He was like, they just keep telling us no. I was like, dude, you got to. It's the best part of ever watching Magic limited GPs. But there is a fundamental issue where players don't really empathize with limited decks, right? Because they're just kind of built on the day. Whereas like with Class Constructed, like I'm an Oldhim player and I get to watch this Oldhim player. Like I already kind of have that connection. And there's a bit of a narrative there for me, where I know with limited, it just looks like you're watching, like sometimes it can look like you're just watching two decks, like just go at each other, two kind of random decks. So I do think it is almost like probably on the aggregate, it is probably worse for coverage. And this coming from a person that likes to watch this, mind you, but I think for like the average player, like it might not be as entertaining as classic.
Yeah, I can see that. I think it's those events are also, I think you can use those to follow players rather than necessarily the format and the games, but at the
Preach,
same time,
sister.
I think following a draft for sure, and following like using the draft to showcase someone, really showing their skill in the draft and then implementing that in their plans when they play is like a really good learning for people. But you don't really seeing that week in, week out on a calling stage. But I think using that for pro quest season, for instance, and maybe a pro tour and a couple of callings is great, and I hope they do so. Anyway, Brendan, let's talk about some learnings and some of the things that we really want to see moving forward with Limited and what we think is important to, I guess, build a great Limited future for Flesh and Blood. So, if we talk about learnings first, what do you think are the key takeaways from the first 4 Limited sets that we've had so far?
So we gotta do a little boomer recap of Welcome. I mean, people have played Welcome to Wraith now because we had the farewell events, but Welcome to Wraith was interesting because you could stay open in quotations by picking armor and picking generics, and like it wasn't necessarily like that in Monarch or Tails. Like specifically in Monarch, you really had to like kind of commit to like 50% of the pool, so like kind of early. And then in Tails, obviously, there were the element cards that were kind of played by two of the characters, so it felt better than Monarch for staying open, but still was it's still tighter than Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising in my opinion. Arcane is a bit of an outlier because it's just a funky set. I actually haven't drafted it too much, to be fair, so I don't think I can comment. But I do think that from a quality perspective, like a drafting quality perspective, mostly enjoyability, I think that we've seen an increase pretty much every set after Arcane Rising. Like I think Monarch was a big step up, although pack distributions were wild. And then Tails was a step up from that, even though I think I enjoyed Monarch more myself.
Yeah, I think at least so far I think takeaways from these first 4 sets is that each set they've learned a bit more about draft. I think they need to learn a bit more about sealed. I think that's probably some of the learnings they'll take away from this previous format. Especially, think about Briar and actually it's interesting playing. I don't know if you've played that sealed format with the errata, but it's a lot more enjoyable, I think.
Yeah, I could imagine.
So I think that's something that they've definitely learned. I think they've also learned about how to build in this idea of staying open. So you talk about Welcome to Wraith, right? It's really, you can stay open. I think you can stay too open in Welcome to Wraith, to be honest. I think it doesn't punish. I actually prefer sealed in Welcome to Wraith to draft, interestingly.
But usually you have playables, right? Where it's like in Tails and in Monarch. Monarch specifically, like I feel like more people at the table ended up with cracked baubles than they do in Welcome to Wraith.
100%, but
even though the
you can't
deck's
stay as open.
Yeah,
you've got to understand like your pick priority order changes in terms of entails and Monarch than it does in other sets, because you've got to understand the archetype you're building and what the level of importance people are going to put on those cards. Like you can look at the same pack in 50 different drafts and different cards are going to wheel each time based on what people are drafting and how they feel about certain cards. So I think that's something that LSS are learning, and that's great. That probably then leads to, okay, do we have to do something with pack distribution to help the draft format a little bit more? Like, for instance, maybe the critique of Tails versus Welcome to Wraith is Welcome to Wraith, you could stay too open. Tails, you couldn't stay open enough potentially, or it wasn't rewarding enough to stay open. It was more rewarding to commit. So I think there's lessons like that. If we talk about sealed versus draft overall on more of a macro level, it seems like draft is a lot more advanced than sealed, right? Like in terms of, we've had, I think, basically all the draft formats have been solid to very good, whereas some of the sealed formats have had a little bit of issue. In particular, I think mostly Tails, to be honest. But
no, Arcane Rising was terrible.
Yeah, if you wouldn't play it.
Yeah. God, that was unenjoyable sealed format.
Do you think both formats are good though? Do you think in general, like they can create a good seal format and a good draft format?
Yeah. I don't think that. I think we talk bad about Tales of Aria sealed a lot, but
And you do mostly. I'm not as against it as you are.
I had to play all the limited callings though, so to spare me, I got some PTSD from those bad boys. You could still I remember when I played in Dallas, I opened my pool and I was like, holy crap, I'm gonna have to work hard for this. And ultimately, I felt like I was able to play well in the day and then get to, the second portion where I started drafting. That was just my goal. I was like, God, I just got to get to draft because this deck sucks. And yeah, it definitely, there was actually a narrative in Monarch Sealed that you would just force Prism, which is wrong. It's just not correct. It's just so wrong. But it was a early narrative and it was quite sticky. A lot of people might still believe that. But in Tales of Aria, yeah, Briar was probably a bit more powerful than the others, unless you open some nutty pools. Didn't need a lot to work with, so we did see a ton of briars. There were a lot of mirrors. And in Tails, there was actually, I kind of felt like there were some bombs. Like some of the higher rarity cards were a bit bomby, which I found annoying. And also equipment in freaking Tales of Aria was just ridiculous, right? Like the guy's got deep blue, your opponent has deep blue and Plume of the Evergreen, and you've got nothing. It's they are starting super far ahead, in my opinion. But yeah, I do think. Go ahead.
Sometimes you had equipments that were also bombs in the form of like Crown of Seeds, maybe being the best card in that set for limited.
Yeah, I think that, and then going back to Arcane Rising Sealed was generally so I think for most players, and even myself included, it was pretty painful a lot of the time because people were just Visceri piling. And Visceri piling is just like you literally get all of your playables, all of your possible playables that block, all of your Visceri cards, and then you run like a 40 card deck. It sucks because like in Arcane Rising, Viscera is the only hero with like a reliable weapon. Dash kind of has it, but has to boost their cards out of their deck, so you can kind of fatigue most things. And those mirrors suck. And playing into Viscera as some of the other decks, in Sealed specifically, can be quite painful because you can just literally not have the tools to push enough damage and kill the opponent. So overall, it's kind of why I think that format was a failure. And then also, Induction Chamber was quite good.
Yeah. So the difference between Sealed and Draft to me is there's a big difference, and it's that the skill involved with Draft is a lot of it is primarily in that draft section. It is understanding the plan that you want to draft and then executing that in your picks and your pick order. And then when you play the games, yeah, of course, there's still a lot of skill involved, but the draft is the really key part where you pull that together. Whereas Sealed, that's, you sit down, those cards are already there in front of you. You have to be able to understand how to build a good deck, but more than that, you have to understand like how to change and adapt game plans and have really good game plans into what other people are trying to do. That's where the skill comes into it. So draft is more upfront, Sealed is a bit more the journey as you go through, and I think that's really important. And I think that's one of the tough like balancing issues that you have, is that I think in Welcome to Wraith, for instance, I think really great Sealed format, to be honest. I think it's like it balances as well. It's not too complicated, which is good, versus something like a Monarch Sealed, which I think is a lot more complicated, and people's game plans need to be a lot more adapt. Even Arcane Rising, to be honest, I think.
I think Monarch Sealed is quite balanced, like Welcome to Wraith, though.
I think it is somewhat balanced. I think it is balanced in the design. I think it's actually quite balanced, but I think in the skill level, it's not as balanced.
Oh yeah.
I think that that's why people would default into Prism, because I think that upfront sort of skill cap that I just talked about in Sealed deck building and the upfront versus the journey with these Prism decks, I think those are a lot easier to execute plans with, versus Chain was a little more complicated, Olivia a bit more complicated, even Bolton a bit more complicated. So that's why we saw a lot of people default into light heroes, I think, as opposed to Shadow, even though I think it's actually balanced. And I thought that led to a good draft for me. I think Monarch is actually where they need to look at for, as much as I preferred Tales of Aria, I think Tales might be, the draft format is great, but I think the Seal format had issues, and the draft format might actually be even a little bit too in-depth, a little bit too complicated in terms of just there's too many things that you need to have go right in the draft for the games to be good, and maybe that's a little bit of a step too far. So I think I see these formats being Sealed. I think Monarch is actually a pretty good Sealed format moving forward. I think they should look to have that level of, I guess, skill cap in terms of the way you execute plans and things like that, and the differentiation between the types of heroes, and then somewhat of a balance almost at the level of draft for Tales of Aria. Between Monarch draft and Tales of Aria draft, I think would be where they want to look at for those kind of things moving forward.
Mm-hmm. I do feel like Welcome to Wraith was kind of the gold standard of Sealed balance, though. It was funny because
I agree, but that's because it's 4 heroes, there's generics, there's equipment that play into all of them. Like I think just it is naturally so well balanced from that perspective, but does that lead to a good draft format? I think the draft format is fine. Does it lead to, I guess, as challenging gameplay as you could have? No, I don't think so.
I think it's just funny. Like, it's funny. Sorry, my dog is squeaking a toy. I don't know if I can. I think it's funny because Welcome to Wraith, like that, what you just agreed to, and about the Sealed format being like healthy, was definitely not the narrative. Welcome to Wraith was very ground floor, a lot of new players, but Dude, this dog squeaking. I don't know if you guys can hear that.
That's great.
Yeah. So a lot of the players did not think that like Ninja was playable. They thought that Guardian was overpowered. A lot of people forced Guardian. So like during the time, people didn't think that sealed format was very balanced. The draft format was viewed as a bit more balanced. But yeah, I think arguably one of the easiest decks to force and best decks in sealed was just kind of written off as being bad, which is Ninja. But yeah, in retrospect, I agree with kind of everything you said there.
Yeah, that's exactly my point. I think you put that more articulately than I did. I think that's my point about Tales of Aria, for instance, is that I think people had problems with that draft form, but I think as people get better at this game and they go back to that format, I think they'll see that, and it might be controversial, maybe people completely disagree with me, but I think they'll see that draft format as really, really balanced and a very good draft format. So
yeah, because like the same argument that would be saying like Guardian is too overpowered and Welcome to Race Seal would just say that Oldhim Fatigue is broken in draft and it's too easy to force.
Yeah, or people just try and force Briar, and you have 5 Briar drafters or whatever. But we saw that.
I don't know why people did that. I don't know why people did that. That was blowing my mind. It was like just we were all participating in this big joke where like no matter how many events happened and how much data showed that like just an unusual amount of people will try to draft Briar and they will all fail. Everybody just kept doing it. I don't know why. It's wild.
It's great, right? Yeah. So we have a few questions about design and where we'd like to see limited formats go. But first, before that, favorite draft format and favorite sealed format, Brendan?
Favorite draft format. It's got to be close between Tales and Monarch. I'm not going to count Welcome to Wraith. And I think my favorite sealed format is Welcome to Wraith, but yeah, Monarch was really good.
You can count those. You can count those because we're about to talk about design and themes, so you can take those if you like.
No, yeah, I mean, I'm just going to stick with one, right? So we'll stick with one, make it easy. We'll go favorite draft format is Tales. Favorite sealed format is Welcome to Wraith.
All right. I'm going to say the same, but with the caveat that I think actually the Monarch sealed format is very close. I think it's very good. It's actually, do you know what? It's super interesting. I remember like the first like sort of sealed games we were playing. That format is just so interesting, and yeah, I might actually say that Monarch is more interesting. So just to be different. All right. So we know we're going to have one limited set this year. Where should LSS go with it? Let's start with what are some of the previous, I guess, things from previous sets that you would like to see them keep or get rid of? So, 3 heroes versus 4 heroes, talents. How would you like to see them keep or use things from previous sets? Equipment even, like the, defenseless versus defendable equipment.
Yeah. So that, great point, by the way. So 3 heroes, I actually think it worked out. Is it strictly better? Maybe. I don't know if I like, the jury's out for me on like if I like a 3 hero format more than a 4 hero format. Talents, I don't think talents are going away. I think the talents are going to be in every set. I think that is just flesh and blood now. Equipment is really important because I remember someone came up to me and they criticized us because we didn't give like Runaways an A in our limited review or like an S. And I was like, yeah. He's like, but that's because it doesn't compete with anything, right? Like the equipments in Tales of Aria are just bombs because they're permanent to stay on the battlefield, and you should probably be first picking equipment most of the time. But like Runaways, in comparison to the other equipment like Deep Blue and Plume of Evergrowth, wasn't as powerful in my opinion. So I would like to see more diversity with the armor, right? Because in Tales of Aria particularly, the armor was very strong. Like it was kind of night and day between the people that had the full suite and the people that didn't, or the people that had the particularly powerful ones, like the Deep Blues and the Plumes, Marker Lightnings, things like this. So I would like to see, more diversity in armor and options, or maybe make them a little less powerful. Weapons and equipment is important. I think a no weapon format sucks. That's just my retrospective on Tales of Aria. I know Viserai had it, but that also led to a bad sealed format in my opinion. Viserai having the weapon, nobody else really having it. Win conditions, I love this. This is an awesome thing to talk about because this is peak Monarch for me, right? Like Monarch was just very much not about trying to just kill your opponent, right? It was about having a game plan, knowing how you're going to win the game, and playing towards that. And you had to do that even in the Prism decks. Definitely doing the Shadow decks. It was literally a prerequisite to play Shadow. But that made Monarch one of my favorite sealed formats because you could just craft these I don't know. What would you call them? I would call them like beautiful, beautiful game plans. And it worked out really well. Like you got rewarded for it. I also think that Monarch was like pivot turns are really important. Tales of Aria a bit less so, but Monarch you could really get the read on when your opponent was trying to pivot on you and apply more pressure than you usually would, maybe forego your arsenal and just totally blow them out. So I loved Monarch for that reason. I think when like being able to develop win conditions and having this sort of tangible sense of tempo is really nice. Where in Tales of Aria it was a bit vomit my hand at my opponent in sealed, which I didn't like as much. And yeah, I mean, I know I kind of just went on a rant, but those are a few things.
Yeah, you just kind of let's dive into some of those. Let's start with, and first of all, I think I agree with you on the kind of idea of like pivot turns being so much in Monarch and being able to identify those. And some of us did it better than others, right, Brendan?
Yep, 100%.
No, but I think so. You talked about the importance of understanding where your opponent is in a game and where you are in a game, and I think that mattered a lot less in Tales of Aria. I would like to see that shift back to what we saw a bit more with Monarch in terms of certain phases of the game mattering more. Whereas Tales of Aria, it felt more about who can grab the tempo and keep the tempo. Whereas Monarch, it was a bit more around giving up some to shift some to set up certain hands. You had a lot more cards that maybe 2 or 3 cards that you wanted to pull together to set up those kind of things. Balsam very much was that sort of thing. The Shadow Heroes were maybe more about second cycle for doing that, but we're still looking to do the same thing. And even Prison to a degree wanted to do that with, okay, well, I want to try and get a shield at the end of my opponent's turn and then maybe a shield on my turn so that I now have like this kind of advantage that I can push. So, this kind of ebb and flow, which I'd love to see us get back to. Equipment, it's interesting you talk about equipment. I want to go back to that one because I have a bit of a different take on Tales of Aria, and this is so cool. There's still even contention, I think, in Tales of Aria, and we're now 7 months removed from that limited format sort of kicking off, or at least 6 months from the peak of it. Is that I actually think that equipment was, yes, very strong, but they purposely pulled back the fact that there was defenseless equipment, right, to try and encourage people to understand that equipment isn't all about defending; it's about utility and understanding it. But I also think that in the limited format, I'm not as high on those as maybe say you or some other prominent players were. I think they're important. I think they're hugely important. I think they're really strong. But there were certain cards that I think you needed to have in your deck, and it was more about, especially in draft. I agree with you in sealed. I think in sealed there wasn't, like you say, a bit of night and day between people who had maybe say a full set of equipment and people who had like one or none. But in the draft format, I think it was less impactful, and it was about trying to understand how you would pull together your strategies, and sometimes you have to give up equipment to do that, which is quite interesting. So I would like to see them keep that, but maybe come back with some defensive equipment. I would like to see some defensive equipment come back into some limits, and I think they will. I think that was pretty clearly a design with Tales of Aria, was to educate people on the use of equipment.
Yeah, can I take us down a trip down
Go on.
down memory lane for Tales of Aria sealed? You open your packs. You're like squeaking across, like, what am I gonna get? Great commons. I got the overflex, colors, and then there's your equipment slot. And
3 amulets.
There's an imposter sitting in there. It's a freaking amulet. Like, God, that was tilting. Like, that sucked.
Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like that. I think the amulets weren't strong enough to justify that decision. I think that's the one thing I do have a bit of an issue with. I would like to see them, I don't mind that idea of using the equipment slot for something else, but I think it needs to be a bit more in line with how strong the equipment were in that set for it to work.
Yeah. Hilarious.
Anything else that you said that I want to kind of comment on? I guess maybe some of my own thoughts. So yeah, equipment is something interesting. I'd really like to see them use. I would be interested to see if there's a way to make equipment even more, I guess, situational, but not necessarily to specific heroes, but maybe to specific plans.
Yeah.
So, for instance, we saw Mark of Lightning, right, which is really powerful in basically all the lightning decks. But rather than it be a talented piece of equipment, what if it's a generic piece of equipment that can be utilized really effectively by certain decks? So you saw this on the kind of defensive standpoint with Runaways, really terrible into Old Time, right, but really, really strong into Briar and Lexi because of the claws. So could we see that on the offensive side? Could we see something that is offensive in nature or proactive in nature that fits into certain strategies but is generic? So maybe you're drafting a certain deck, or you've got a certain sort of deck and sealed where it doesn't work in with as much, but then there's others where it works in with. That's something I would like to see from the equipment side moving forward. I think it's a cool design aspect to to dive into.
Yeah, I think the one thing I want you to dive into is like what I talked about with Monarch sealed gameplay versus Tales of Aria sealed gameplay. Like Monarch, very game plan oriented. Like you had to kind of know how you were going to win the game, and also pivot turns, right? Like what we would call like probably this is the definition of tempo, right? Like there was a lot of tempo in that format, and I think that Tales of Aria was just different. I think Tales of Aria sealed was more kind of just like bleh, like you're just kind of dumping your cards, you're playing the 5 card hands. Whereas in Monarch, I just felt like everything was so there's a lot of game context into so many of your decisions.
Yeah, there is. I think Tails does have some redeeming qualities in the fact that you sometimes you can take the front foot, and with good game management, you can keep that and even start to use your life as more of a resource. In Monarch, it felt like it was really tough to do that. I felt like you had to really kind of swing the tempo with a specific hand to necessarily do that in some game states, which was, I think, a little bit less enjoyable in some situations. But I think if I was to put it on a scale, right, I want like maybe 80 or 90% of the game experience and the kind of fundamentals from Monarch sealed, and maybe like 10 or 20% of the Tales of Aria, if that makes sense. So that's probably what I would like to see move forward, because I do agree with you to a certain extent with that format. I think Monarch, the way that you had to understand the 40 cards in your, the 30 cards in your deck, and what you're trying to do with those 30 cards over the course of, an early game, a mid game, and a late game, and how you want to pitch those, how you want to use them, how you want to defend with them. Oh, I've defended with this card. Well, that's actually a really important card out of my deck now. I think I want to see that return, but also I would love to see a few things of Tails kept, just in terms of maybe some of the power level of certain cards, or the ability to sometimes be able to take the front foot and through game management be able to keep that.
Yeah, I feel like Tails is really the only format where there were some Majestics that I just hated to see. Like they just pissed me off when they got played. Like Awakening, Oakenold, and there's definitely another somewhere. I don't know if it's Blossoming Spell, but mostly like Channel Mount Heroic. Like that one's pretty tilting as well. But like Awakening, pivot turn on a stick, just ridiculous. Oakenold, a bit easier to get off and limited than you think. You just throw it in Arsenal and wait for the double fuse. And then Channel Mount Heroic was just not super fun to sit on the other side of the board from when you're playing against a Briar.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, at least in Monarch, those were at the rare level, right? Soul Reaping, Soul Vanguard.
Yeah, I mean with Soul Reaping, you do balance banishing, of course, but Via the Vanguard was a freaking bologna sandwich. I did think that Via the Vanguard didn't instantly end the game, but that was a pushed rare for sure.
Yeah, it was very, very good.
Yeah.
All right, Brendan. Well, I guess that's a little bit about some of the things we'd like to see kept. Let's close it out limited with a bit of fun. Just from, if we're theory crafting, we've got the keys to the kingdom. We get to decide. We get to design this next limited set, Brendan. Me and you. The themes, talents. What's the hero count we want to see? What about weapons and equipment? You kind of talked about that already. You want to see fixed weapons rather than like activated weapons that have combat value primarily. Win conditions. What are some things that you want to see? Let's start with like themes and talents. Would you like to see us revisit something from the existing themes and talents, or would you like to see something new completely?
So I mean, with weapons, I might have not heard you correctly. With weapons, I do want every hero to have a weapon that does damage. Lexi was interesting because that weapon force dominate, which is kind of inherently anti-fatigue, but I just think that weapons are really healthy in a limited format, especially in the sealed portion, because I think that sealed fatigue decks are just like they instantly ruin the format. It's terrible. If it's even like 50% playable, it's just so bad. Like things that go out there and just try to not interact and put 40 cards in their deck. But we haven't seen that since Arcane Rising. In terms of armor, it's like a diversity of armor. I just feel like the armor was like all the armor is just kind of S tier in Tales of Aria. Like you said, we kind of disagree on that one. But I didn't feel like that in other formats. Well, I mean, every format in Flesh and Blood, armor has been good, but in Tales, I feel like it really shined. 3 heroes or 4 heroes? Good question. That's a tough one. Because the Tales drafting experience was so good, I think that 3 heroes is fine, right? Like, I think 3 heroes is good. And I liked it. So maybe we just never go back to 4. I just feel like I'm not sure that I'm sold on my answer there yet. I haven't played Tales and then gone back and played Monarch,
Yeah, it's so interesting. Do you know, it's funny. James White, I don't know if he let something slip, but in this Covenant cast I was listening to, he was talking about designing a set, and he was saying, and he could just be specifically referring to Tales of Ararat, but he didn't specifically say it. And then he said, when we're putting a set together, maybe we have 2 heroes that we really want to because they fit the thing, they're the ones we want, and then we find a 3rd hero to fit into it. And that was the example he used. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. How many 3 hero sets they're looking at? I wouldn't be surprised if we saw, mostly 3 hero sets moving forward. I would be very surprised if we see exclusively 3 hero sets, and I'd be very surprised if we see no more 3 hero sets. So I think 3 to 4 heroes, it's either. I'm okay with either. I think if I'm going back, let's keep with the 3 hero set this time around. Let's dive into it a bit more if that's how the talents work. I'm keen to see that. I have one for you though that I want to throw around. You just talked about equipment, and you want them to have. I actually think, by the way, Shiver I think is one of the most balanced pieces of equipment for limited. I think that
like token equipment
does a really good job. Yeah, it does a really good job of that. What about common or rare weapons? Not tokens. This is something that I would like to see explored for limited in the future.
Yeah, it could be cool. I'm trying to think because like they've always been at a very high rarity that you saw them.
I agree.
Not often.
So I would like to see them because you look at Monarch for instance, right? If you got Hexagore, except for the time that you played against it and it was broken, it's not really a weapon that you're wanting to play, right? Even you look at like Voltaire and the last, it was whatever. The Ice Hammer was really, really strong. But why can we find somewhere where they get to use this design space for maybe Blitz as well, but then couple it with maybe some really specific weapons that you can use in certain archetypes and limited? Could be a bit niche and a bit deep, but I would really like to see that happen. I think that could take the place of equipment, for instance, and could be something they could dive into.
Yeah, something that lets you just change up your style of play, not just like a strict power upgrade that plays into the same archetype. Like I think that could be really cool.
Definitely. Yeah, not an upgrade, like you say, like a sideways movement as opposed to an upward movement. Like for instance, hey, Talashar's in this set, and I've drafted this Ranger deck, which or maybe Ranger's a bad example because of the arrows, but I've drafted this Kano or Wizard deck or whatever, but I've drafted more attack actions, and I've got Talashar rather than my other weapon or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, I think that could be really cool. Like, I particularly see it as in like look at like Welcome to Wraith. What if axes were the default in Dorinthia and you could open Dawnblade? It'd be too powerful because there's like a bunch of single weapon pumps, I think, and Dawnblade has the counters. But like, I think that's kind of what I see it as, like as close as I can get my mind to it. But ideally, mostly side grade. There is one thing I left off, Hayden. That honestly, if they don't put this in the next limited set, I think I'm done. Do you know what it is?
Go.
You know what it is?
Is it the revealed crack bauble?
No, it's another Runeblade. We need another Runeblade.
Yeah,
they better not stop printing those. Runeblades every set. I know. Everybody's on the same page. This is what everybody wants. Listen to us, Legend Story. We just want more Runeblades.
Can I be contrary and say maybe I don't want a Runeblade? Maybe I want like. Do you know what? Actually, I would love to see if we're going to do a 4-hero set. I would love to see 2 Welcome to Wraith classes and 2 Arcane Rising classes. I think that's what I'd love to see.
I think
that's something I'd like to see.
I think 99% of the Fab player base does not want there to be another Runeblade in this limit. Like people would lose their mind. Could you imagine? 3 times in a row. Every single time they printed it too, it's been broken. So it's like got this last Runeblade. That'd be wild.
At least limited focus. I guess it's not as bad. The last thing I'd say is I would like to see. I would probably like us to see, if not in the next set, then the set after, a return to Light and Shadow, and to reinvestigate those. I think they're really interested for limited play, especially Shadow. To be honest, I think Shadow is really interesting for limited play, just because of the way you can set up game states and like you talk about win conditions. I think that should be really important to any limited format. So, yeah, I think that's something that I would like to see if I'm sort of wrapping up my my design of the next set.
Yeah, I would like to know in the comments if anybody else has heard this, because I might just be making it up, but I feel like somewhere I heard that they're actually not.
Sound like you?
No, they're not. They're not revisiting like the talents. They don't really have plans to like kind of go back. Not that they won't ever, but like definitely not for a long time. Like it's not part of the sort of original design philosophy. But please let me know if anybody else has heard that.
Yeah, I haven't heard that, but interesting. Anyway, Brendan, this limited format, I think we're both really keen to see where it goes next. We're both big limited lovers, of course. This podcast is almost a limited podcast. We would like to see it be important. I'm excited to see what we get with Uprising and especially what they do with OP, I think, in regards to Limited. Hopefully, just in general, it's just a well-designed set, and Limited play, both sealed and draft, is fun and exciting, but also then we also get the OP to support that. That's kind of my view as we close this out.
I'm congruent with that. I think we have similar fondness for Limited and Flesh and Blood.
Yep.
All right. Well, onto my favorite part. Yeah, my favorite part of the podcast, which is a review. So we have a Google review here. Oh, I don't know if it's Google actually. It's just a review from John Franey, who actually won one of the playmat that I did a giveaway for on my Twitter. And he said, "This podcast features the glorious union of the top of the world and the very bottom. Hailing from North America and Oceania, we hear weekly wisdom from the world's shortest, formerly blonde fab player." I don't know who he's referencing. "And somebody who's actually won something." Okay. Most recently, we heard the shower thoughts of a man as he pours body wash on his hand. Yep. We also heard a man's audio keep cutting out because it can't leave his effing mic alone. Yeah, and you really got to work on that. There truly is no better place to get all things Flesh and Blood. Well, John, you certainly were dunking on one half of this podcast. But it's okay. We can make fun of Hayden every now and then. But yeah, thank you so much for the review. Hayden, if they want to submit a review to rival John's review, where do they do it?
You just need to go to ratethispodcast.com/Arsenal Pass. Probably just chuck into Google, rate this podcast Arsenal Pass, and it'll come up for you. You can get your review in.
Yep, funny is better. Funny is better.
That is what Brendan likes, especially apparently ones that dunk on Brendan.
What? What are you talking about?
Closing out this week's pod, just want to say, of course, as always, a massive thank you to all of our patrons. Thank you for your support, ongoing support, and allowing us to do what we do. We do have a couple of Patreon exclusive things coming for the end of the month, podcast as per usual. And we haven't talked about what we'll do. Otherwise, we might look at another review, or we might do something a little bit different this month. So leave it to me and Brendan to talk about. Otherwise, we're both on Twitter. Brendan is at BrendanAPG, and I'm at Fian_Dale. Come and chat to us, talk all things fab. We post, decks that we play. Brendan just mostly throws out spicy questions, to be honest, about the future of Flesh and Blood and announcements, which usually get quite a lot of comments.
It's called engagement farming, sir. Please. No, I'm kidding. I do enjoy a lot of we talk a lot of shit on there. I'm not gonna
lie. Otherwise, until next week, Brendan, hopefully I'll actually see you next week.
Yeah. Well, let me know. Let us know what you think of the new intro style. I think it's going to be way better. We're ditching the old 2021 Arsenal pass, and we're born anew here with these natural, free flowing, irreverent intros. And I'm all for it.
Just in time for Easter.
Just in time.